mage fired a blazing spell into the air, the flames slamming straight into the dragon's wing. The purple dragon roared in pain. From the backline, a man shouted for Basa to activate a speed-boosting spell. Basa was an A-rank shaman affiliated with Golden Time. Next, the man ordered Ladish to keep the fire magic pouring in. Ladish was an A-rank mage, also from Golden Time. Then there was Saki. She was an S-class, 3rd S swordsman, wielding the savior's sword. She was told to wait for an opening and finish the fight. The one giving the commands was Kunan, an S-rank magic swordsman from Golden Time. The last person to receive instructions was Yuki. He was told to stay back and keep hidden. He was only frank with no class and no affiliation. A massive backpack hung from his shoulders. Biza, Lotish, and Kunan attacked at the same time. They kept up the assault until Saki found the perfect moment. She activated a skill. It was called Luminous Slash. In the blink of an eye, the dragon was struck across multiple parts of its body. The dragon let out one final roar before crashing to the ground. Yuki watched the S-rank fighters in awe. As expected of them, they had taken down a dragon with ease. Decades had passed since the disaster known as dungeons appeared in their world, along with the adventurers who challenged them. Even so, humanity had still failed to fully clear the ever-growing number of dungeons. As a result, neglected and undiscovered dungeons frequently triggered dungeon breaks, becoming a serious social problem. Worse still, many adventurers hunted monsters only for money and refused to clear the dungeons themselves. Only a small number of heroes truly understood the danger and led parties like this one to push toward full completion. Suddenly, someone smacked Yuki's backpack. It was Basa. He called him luggage carrier and demanded a potion immediately. Yuki hurriedly rummaged through the bag. Lotish scoffed, pointing out that unlike Yuki, he was actually risking his life on the front lines. Basa added that even if Yuki was acquainted with Saki, he never expected such a small fry to tag along. They looked down on him for being the lowest-ranked rookie adventurer. He had almost no mana, was slow, and overall completely useless in their eyes. Kunan cut them off. Both men froze. He reminded them that they were inside a dungeon estimated to be shrank. This was not a place for idle chatter. They apologized. Then Kunan turned to Yuki. He told him to take his role seriously and do his job properly because he was still a member of the party. Yuki replied, "Yes, sir." They continued deeper into the dungeon. Yuki agreed with Kunan's words. He realized that he still lacked the awareness expected of an adventurer. He had gotten too excited watching top-tier adventurers in action. He wanted to say that he had learned a lot. At the same time, it made him painfully aware of the massive gap between them. He didn't even have a class. Someday he wanted to become an adventurer like them. Lost and thought he failed to stay alert. Saki noticed and warned him that taking his eyes off the objective during an adventure was strictly forbidden. She said she didn't want to lose any more family. Yuki felt the same. He never wanted to feel that loss again. 2 years ago, he watched the news on TV as their district was destroyed by a dungeon break. Rescue operations were underway, but survival was deemed hopeless. Dungeon disasters had become an increasingly serious problem in recent years. He and Saki had grown up together in an orphanage. They admired adventures, so they left the orphanage to chase that dream. But the home they were supposed to return to, and everyone still living in the orphanage, were all wiped out by the dungeon break. That tragedy hardened his resolve to prevent such disasters from ever happening again. What he didn't know was that someone had been watching him all along. He was the final piece in someone else's plan. A strange, unsettling presence brushed against his senses. But before he could make sense of it, a magic circle appeared beneath their feet. It was a teleportation trap. Kunan shouted for everyone to brace themselves. Those who set the trap were eagerly anticipating Yuki's arrival. They landed safely, but it was immediately clear. They had been transported straight into the boss room. Kunan reacted instantly, ordering everyone to form a circle and secure the perimeter. He also told Yuki to prepare the return item. Saki sensed something wrong. A puddle of blood on the ground began to boil, and a figure slowly emerged from it. It was a man dressed in a butler's uniform. They instinctively assumed he was the Demon King. The title Demon King was reserved only for S-class dungeon bosses, the most vile and dangerous beings of all. Yet the man before them looked almost offended by the label. Saki attacked. Kunan formed an ice javelin. He prepared to rain it down on the enemy as Saki closed the distance. At the optimal range, she unleashed Luminous Slash. The man blocked every attack effortlessly, remarking that young people these days lacked manners. He added that they were ignorant as well. More figures appeared. Maids, an elf, a beastkin, and others. Kunan was blown away. A woman with pointed elf ears attacked with magic, commenting that some unnecessary extras had tagged along with their target. All of a sudden, this monster appeared in front of Ba. The beastkin kicked Ba aside. Lodish froze in shock. Before he could react, a man wearing a magician's hat appeared behind him. Suddenly, another magic circle formed on the ground, and a calm voice remarked that this was no time for games. Someone stepped out. Everyone saw the true Demon King arrive. His presence alone exerted overwhelming pressure. Yuki was stunned by the sight before him. The Demon King released a terrifying surge of energy and fixed his gaze on Yuki. His subordinates immediately knelt. They lined up before him in absolute submission. Kunan knew it. They were moments away from being wiped out. He searched desperately for an opening. Any chance at survival, the air was suffocating with tension. Yuki realized the same thing, and he refused to let it end like this. He quickly rummaged through his backpack. He knew exactly what to do. He pulled out an item and pressed the button. A magic circle appeared. He initiated the return sequence. As the countdown began at 5, he stepped forward. He deliberately drew the Demon King's attention and declared that he would be his opponent. The Demon King looked intrigued. Lotish panicked. If Yuki stepped any farther, he would be outside the return range. Saki rushed toward, but Kunan grabbed her and sprinted backward. He understood what Yuki was doing. The countdown reached 3. Kunan and Saki were now far from Yuki. Saki struggled, demanding to know what he was doing. Yuki glanced back and confirmed the distance. Everything was going according to plan. Because Kunan understood, the beastkin lunged at Yuki. The Demon King asked him what he was plotting. The countdown hit 2. Yuki grinned and replied that it was obvious. He threw the magic item. The countdown dropped to 1. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen. Yuki declared that he would defeat the Demon King. Kunan caught the item and praised him for his magnificent decision. The countdown reached 0. The magic circle beneath the adventurers glowed brilliantly. Saki cried out Yuki's name in despair because everyone else would be transported out except for him. Yuki felt at peace with his decision, while Saki screamed. And just like that, they were gone. The Demon King asked if that was his way of defeating him. Yuki confidently answered yes. He had saved all those high-ranking adventurers, unlike himself. If they returned alive, they would surely conquer the dungeon someday. Still, he felt guilty for leaving Saki behind. The Demon King was impressed that Yuki had thrown away his own life for the future of humanity. He remarked that such madness was truly spectacular. Then he offered the human a deal. Yuki hadn't expected that and asked him to clarify. The Demon King said he had heard correctly. He wanted Yuki to join them and help conquer dungeons. Yuki was shocked. Monsters clearing dungeons. He asked why they would do such a thing. The Demon King explained that his kind was constantly exposed to danger because of human conquests. Yuki replied that humans lived under the same threat. The Demon King pointed out that if humans simply stopped entering dungeons, monsters would have no reason to go out of their way to harm them. That dungeon had been classified as shrank from the very start. It was considered deadly even during the investigation phase. To prevent further losses, the dungeon itself needed to be strengthened. And to do that, they would have to conquer other dungeon bosses and absorb their immense magical power. He could no longer allow the tragedy suffered by his subordinates to repeat. The word tragedy caught Yuki's attention. He realized that the Demon King was not so different from him. He understood that this plan would require sacrificing other dungeons. The Demon King admitted it openly. He even said they were willing to cooperate with humans if necessary. Everything he did was for the sake of his subordinates. It was only natural. Yuki understood that feeling, doing anything for family, even if it meant dying. He asked the Demon King if he could swear that once he became stronger, he would no longer kill humans, only drive them away. The Demon King replied that monsters were bound to their dungeons. If they became powerful enough that humans could no longer handle them, then humans would eventually stop coming. Yuki hesitated. Could he really trust him? The Demon King said calmly that if Yuki refused, he would simply die and countless humans would die alongside him. Yuki knew that someday Kunan and the others would return to conquer this dungeon. But if nothing changed, the casualties would only continue. Another tragedy would surely follow. He thought long and hard, and then he made his decision. He would help the Demon King. Without warning, the Demon King grabbed his hand. Yuki declared firmly that he wasn't doing this for the Demon King's sake. He was doing it for humanity. The Demon King was pleased with his resolve. From that moment on, Yuki became their collaborator. Yuki wondered if someone like him was truly suitable. After all, he didn't even have a class. But that was exactly why he was. Monster Temare was a class that only the jobless could choose. They looked at him with greedy eyes. sneering that an incompetent piece of trash like him would be perfect for monsters to use. But Yuki had no intention of letting them do as they pleased. He would be the one to tame them. The Demon King explained that for them to enter other dungeons, they had to be summoned. For that to happen, they needed a collaborator who was a monster tamer. The condition to become a monster tamer was having a blank job field. The second requirement was forming a contract with a monster, which was essential. There were 3 ways to form a contract. One was to fight and defeat the monster. Another was to understand and communicate with it. Yuki asked about the third option. The Demon King revealed that the third method was force. He released a surge of energy that made Yuki scream in pain. Yuki complained that it hurt and demanded to know what he had done. He was shocked when a screen suddenly appeared. Through it, the Demon King could see everything Yuki saw. That made Yuki realize that his actions would be completely exposed. The Demon King had prepared for the possibility of betrayal, which meant Yuki couldn't ask for help. He had to do this alone. The Demon King flicked his finger, and a magic circle appeared beneath him. The preparations for the conquest were complete. It was time to send Yuki to the surface. Yuki panicked. He hadn't done anything yet. The Demon King instructed him to dive into any dungeon. At the appropriate time, he should summon him to resolve everything. Even then, Yuki still didn't understand what counted as the appropriate time. He tried to ask, but before he could, he was already transported to the dungeon entrance where the other adventurers were gathered. Saki froze in shock, her tears stopping instantly. Yuki gave her an awkward wave. She rushed forward and hugged him tightly, crying even harder. Nearby, Basa looked at Kunan as if demanding an explanation, but Kunan could only shake his head. He had no idea either. The next day, Yuki went to the administration office to request permission to conquer a dungeon on his own. He didn't expect to run into resistance before even entering. The staff explained the situation to him. Recent dungeon activity wasn't focused on clearing sections anymore. Instead, most adventurers entered dungeons purely for money. Yuki knew that applied to nearly everyone except Shranks. That was why dungeon outbreaks were increasing, but he also knew the guild would never admit it. To prevent stagnation caused by such behavior, strict security measures and entry restrictions had been placed on all discovered dungeons. The woman showed him an infographic. She added that aside from making progress in dungeon conquest, an adventurer's contribution rating could only increase by earning the guild's trust. If he couldn't operate as part of a verified party, they couldn't confirm his contribution. Because of that, the guild couldn't tolerate actions like suddenly diving solo without forming a party. Yuki understood. If someone truly intended to clear a dungeon, there was no reason to go alone. Solo divers were usually desperate people chasing money, hoping for a lucky jackpot. He explained that he was requesting an F-rank dungeon and that his goal was simply to level up. The woman nodded in understanding. She assigned him an F-rank dungeon, Labyrinth of Silence. There were very few monster reports making it suitable for rookies. He was guided there and the staff unlocked the gate. She told him to go ahead. There was an emergency button he could press if he needed assistance. Yuki remembered her saying the security was strict, but it didn't seem excessive. Still, it made sense. This was a neglected dungeon. Suddenly, the Demon King asked what a neglected dungeon was. Yuki nearly jumped. He hadn't expected the voice to speak directly in his head. He asked if that was the Demon King's skill. The Demon King replied that it was actually Yuki's skill. Communication with monsters was basic for a monster tamer. Yuki didn't know that. It was his first time using a skill. It was a passive skill, convenient but unsettling. As he descended the dungeon's staircase, Yuki explained that a neglected dungeon was one lacking management, maintenance, and conquest. There were simply too many dungeons for proper response. If a dungeon was rich in resources, adventurers would flock to it for profit, and proper measures would be enforced. The Demon King summarized it simply. The dungeon had been abandoned by humans. He expected the monsters inside to be breeding peacefully. Yuki added that if monster reproduction exceeded a dungeon's limits, it could collapse. He noticed there were very few monsters inside. But even for a weak dungeon, something felt off. Suddenly, the ground trembled as someone screamed at him to run. A man and a woman burst past him, fleeing in terror from the dungeon boss. Yuki stared in shock at the massive slime behind them. The Demon King immediately understood. With too few humans entering the dungeon, the monsters had resorted to cannibalism. That was why there were so few monsters left, and why that thing had grown so enormous. Yuki guided them toward an alleyway, but the slime was rapidly catching up to them. Even when they were close, the woman began to lose hope. Her strength was failing. She stumbled and was caught, Her body was swallowed, trapped inside the slime. Yuki asked Demon King Liber if he could save her once he was summoned. Liber replied that it was impossible. The aftershock of the summoning alone would blow the slime apart along with everything else inside it. That was no good. The woman looked like she was drowning within the slime. Yuki suddenly had an idea. He jumped straight into the slime. The Demon King was amused, just as he expected, even at the cost of his own body. Yuki would do anything to save someone. He swam through the viscous mass toward the woman. Once he reached her and grabbed hold, he knew it was time to summon Demon King Liber. A violent surge of energy erupted, and Liber's hands began to manifest. Liber allowed him to use his power. In the middle of the summoning, Yuki coughed up blood. It felt as if his body was being burned from the inside out. A holographic image of Liber appeared behind him and told him not to break. Liber tried to cross the magic circle. He tested it with a finger. He couldn't help but be surprised. This was all Yuki could muster, even at full power. It was weak, but still sufficient for an enemy of this level. Power gathered at the tips of his fingers. Then Yuki cast Chaotic Dawn. A devastating beam struck the enemy and caused a massive explosion. Yuki realized just how terrifying that power was. It was nothing short of a disaster. Everything in front of them was wiped out. The woman regained consciousness and trembled, saying it was terrifying. The man noticed Yuki's injuries. Blood was flowing from Yuki's eyes and mouth. The man urged him to hurry outside, saying he looked critically injured. Only then did Yuki realize how bad his condition was. His vision blurred, and he collapsed face first onto the ground. A few days later, inside the Endless Abyss dungeon, Yuki told Liber that his first rank-up had happened while he was unconscious. He had received the notification in the hospital. He mentioned that he had scared the two adventurers, yet they still carried him out and reported everything properly. Liber asked why he looked so downcast and invited him to have a toast instead. Yuki didn't understand why. All he had done was summon him. He felt disappointed when he realized that summoning was the only thing he could contribute. Liber pointed out that Yuki hadn't abandoned the life in front of him at that moment. Instead, he had seized a different possibility without hesitation. Liber said he liked that strength and offered him a wineglass. Yuki accepted it and thanked him for the praise. Liber admitted that it troubled him how Yuki nearly died every time he summoned him. So he introduced someone Yuki could summon next time. Her name was Elvina, an undead maid. Yuki noticed how calm and composed she was. She joked that falling in love with her at first sight would be troublesome. After all, she had no pulse. Her undead joke didn't land very well. Yuki worried if she would be all right. Liber reassured him that she was stronger than he was. Elvina said she wanted to be a relatable and approachable maid. They decided to focus on raising Yuki's level first. He needed to grow strong enough to withstand summoning Liber properly. Soon, several burning creatures approached them. Elvina simply punched them. Every threat was eliminated instantly. Yuki realized just how strong she was. They were inside an E-rank dungeon, the den of the Burning Ones. Elvina ran circles around him, proudly declaring that she was a capable maid. Yuki was reminded of a child from the orphanage who used to seek attention in the same way. She always played with him. The nostalgia didn't last long. A flood of level-up notifications appeared, nearly driving him insane. Elvina was surprised that he found leveling up annoying. She wondered if that was some kind of living joke. They reached a darker section of the dungeon. Yuki noticed that he could maintain Elvina's summon far longer than Lier's is. She explained that Liber was simply too special. The mana required to summon him was so immense that the summoning was likely interrupted halfway through. Yuki knew that was true. He had only managed to summon Liber's fingertips. Elvina concluded that by comparison, she was a bargain, someone Yuki's mana could easily sustain. Yuki replied that she was reliable. That made her blush. Yuki realized that summoning wasn't just about raw power. Efficiency mattered too. They came upon a sealed door. Yuki wondered how they were supposed to get inside. Elvina stretched her arms. She punched it. The door shattered. She casually remarked that she had only been knocking. A warrior stood waiting on the other side. Elvina charged forward. The warrior wielded a flaming sword, but Yuki noticed something strange about the flame. He threw a dagger. It deflected the blade just before it could strike Elvina. Still, a trace of flame brushed her cheek, causing cracks to spread across her skin. Yuki asked if she was all right. She asked him when he had noticed the holy attribute flames. He answered that they simply looked different from the fire throughout the dungeon. They resembled the light Saki used. Elvina explained that holy flames were the natural enemy of the undead. She joked that it made her heart race, even though her heart had already stopped. Yuki told her this wasn't the time for jokes and urged her to retreat. But the warrior activated a fire circle sanctuary. Elvina realized that the dungeon boss was similar to Lieber. It wouldn't allow them to escape. Yuki considered summoning Lieber, but Elvina stopped him. With his current strength, he could only summon her. They had no choice but to face it together. Elvina remarked that it was a cruel joke, a monster tamer standing on the front lines instead of his monsters. But that was exactly Yuki's plan. They were comrades. Her lips curved into a smile. Now she was fully committed to fighting alongside him. Yuki would show the dungeon boss the results of their growth, and if it came down to it, she would protect him. Elvina and Yuki prepared themselves to face the dungeon boss. Yuki had expected to gain a new skill after leveling up. He obtained Eye of Truth. Through it, he could read the enemy's abilities. It described holy fire as a flame that exerted absolute effectiveness against dark attribute beings. Elvina asked what was wrong. When Yuki looked at her, her skill appeared made of all wind. It increased all parameters for a limited duration. At the same time, the system warned him of an incoming attack from the dungeon boss. Fire spiraled toward them. Yuki grabbed Elvina and pulled her out of the way. He told her that he could now see monster attributes and skills, along with their danger levels. She replied that this was one of the basic abilities of a monster tamer. Eyes that reveal the truth of monsters. He still couldn't see everything, but it was a good start. They braced themselves for the next attack. Elvina moved swiftly, dodging the flames. She charged straight at the dungeon boss. Now she could attack with confidence. She kicked it. There was no reaction. Yuki was stunned. Elvina realized that her attack hadn't dealt any damage. Yuki explained that he had just discovered the dungeon boss was actually a fire monster. Elvina was dumbfounded. It seemed obvious at first glance. He clarified that small amorphous fire monsters were moving inside the armor, shifting constantly to evade attacks. That was why her kicks weren't landing. She wasn't hitting their true bodies. Yuki could see the letters and indicators slowly shifting. Their strategy was decided. Elvina teased him, telling him not to be captivated by her performance this time. He warned her that the boss was winding up an attack. She needed to jump now. Yuki began issuing commands. Duck, pull back to the right. The next strike was coming from below. Then target the left arm, the right shoulder, and finally the head. The dungeon boss staggered, visibly disoriented. Yuki told her to fall back for the moment. It was the first time the boss showed a clear reaction, but even then, it barely managed to dodge. He instructed her to evade to the right. Suddenly, Yuki was caught off guard and struck. Fortunately, Elvina rushed in and saved him, reminding him to look out for his own safety as well. Once they reached a safe distance, Yuki apologized. Elvina then suggested that he use her skill. He checked its description. She explained that a monster tamer could forcibly activate a contracted monster's skill. That skill would boost her stats for only a brief instant. Yuki realized that if he used it, they would have to finish the fight before the enemy could react. It could only be activated once, meaning the timing had to be perfect. Elvina acted cute and said she trusted him to use it properly. Yuki resolved to end the battle with the next exchange. A series of danger warnings flashed before his eyes. He warned her of an incoming combo attack and told her to dodge to the right. After that, she had to remain exactly where she was, then slide left. A blast of flames surged toward Yuki. He was struck and knocked to the ground, but he forced himself back up and told her not to worry about him. He ordered her to leap left. Then he activated Made of All Wind. Elvina's kick exploded with power, slamming the dungeon boss into the ground and carving a deep dent into it. The battle ended. Yuki finally relaxed, relieved that they had won. Elvina said softly that the skill had taken a lot out of her. With those words, she bid him farewell. Yuki was stunned. She disappeared before he could even stand. He tried to summon her again, but there was no response. Eventually, he returned to the heart of Lieber's dungeon. Lieber was relieved to see him alive. He asked where Elvina was. He said he needed to speak with her so he wouldn't leave her behind on the next adventure. Lieber guided him onward. If Yuki had arrived any later, he wouldn't have been able to see her face. Yuki froze when he saw her resting inside a coffin. Confused, he asked what this meant. Lieber explained that this was how they mourned their dead. He asked if it was different from how humans did it. Yuki couldn't understand what he was hearing, so Lee explained further. Elvina was an undead maid. The skills of her race produced immense power at the cost of destroying their own bodies. Yuki remembered that the skill had a usage limit of 1. Now he understood what that truly meant. He couldn't accept it. He never wanted her to die. He only wanted to defeat the enemy. Liber stated calmly that for the sake of protecting the dungeon, her life had been a worthy price. He believed she had fulfilled her duty to the utmost. He admitted that the responsibility ultimately lay with him, the Demon King. But Yuki couldn't accept that answer. He blamed himself for not thinking carefully and for blindly following her suggestions and for being too weak to fight properly on his own. Once again, he regretted his weakness. Yuki broke down in tears. Liber told him that he intended to make Yuki stronger. Yuki asked if there was anything he could do, any skill that could bring her back. Liber replied that there was none. A monster tamer used monsters. They consumed them. They did not repair them. Yuki refused to accept that. Then someone arrived and told Liber not to be so cruel. It was May. She said that a conclusion had already been reached regarding this matter, but the boy had not been included in that decision, so it wasn't truly settled. Yuki recognized her as one of the executives and activated Eye of Truth. She introduced herself politely as he read her information. She possessed both holy and demonic attributes, the skill made in order and resurrection from corpse. His breath caught. She smiled and asked him if he wanted to know how to bring Elvina back. Yuki felt a surge of hope when he heard that Elvina could be brought back to life. He knew that with May's skill, it was possible. May was surprised that he could see her skills. Because of that, there wasn't much need for explanation. Yuki clarified that all he could see were the skills effects and the fact that there were conditions attached. That made sense. He had only just awakened the skill, so it was natural that his understanding was limited. He asked May to explain it properly. May formally introduced herself. She was responsible for overseeing everyone within the dungeon, managing affairs, caring for its inhabitants, and providing backup. The word backup caught Yuki's attention, so she elaborated. Since humans constantly invaded the dungeon to kill them, she existed as insurance. Even if someone died, she could resurrect them and prevent the dungeon from collapsing. The moment Yuki heard that, he demanded that she resurrect Elvina immediately. May calmly reminded him that there were conditions. First, the skill consumed an enormous amount of magic. It was extremely inefficient. For example, if she killed Yuki and then resurrected him, the cost would equal the magic required to construct an entire dungeon floor. For a human, that alone was already excessive. For Elvina, it would require even more. She explained that using the skill would cause the dungeon to shrink drastically. Yuki understood immediately. A smaller dungeon would be far easier for humans to conquer. She confirmed it and added that even the executive Xian strongly opposed it. Shrinking the dungeon would only lead to more deaths. Yuki suggested slowly accumulating unused magic over time. Given enough time, they might gather enough for a single resurrection, but that wouldn't work either. The second condition required the individual's own remaining magic. Elvina's magic still existed, but it would completely dissipate within 10 days at most. That was why they needed to urgently acquire magic from another source. May confirmed his conclusion. That was the reason they had sent him to conquer a slightly larger dungeon. Now Yuki finally understood the true purpose of conquering dungeons. By stealing magic from other dungeons, May's resurrection skill could be used without restriction. That was certainly one of their objectives. However, the dungeons Yuki had encountered so far were nowhere near sufficient. Yuki asked how much magic was actually needed, if even an F-rank or E-rank dungeon required so much. May admitted she didn't understand human ranking systems, but she shared that when she proposed targeting a truly large dungeon, everyone else dismissed it as suicide. They couldn't risk exposing the core of their crucial plan, the very thing Elvina had sacrificed her life to protect, to mortal danger again. Yuki volunteered. Liber immediately called it reckless. He asked if Yuki had any plan at all, since both Yuki and any new monsters would likely end up just like Elvina. Yuki admitted that he hadn't figured out how to conquer it or grow stronger yet. But if this was the only viable path, he had no choice no matter what. He knew that was the reason Liber had made a contract with him in the first place. Liber accepted that answer. He was about to refuse. When someone cleared their throat, the butler stepped forward and volunteered to train Yuki. Yuki recognized him immediately. It was the man Saki had fought. May was pleased to see Vento support the plan. Viento reasoned that with Yuki's current strength, danger and sacrifice were inevitable, no matter where he went. Liber understood. He entrusted Yuki to Vento for the next 7 days. He ordered Yuki to follow him. Yuki placed his trust in him as well. May remarked that she could finally relax since Viento was exceptionally strong, but Liber insisted that she accompany them immediately. Considering that Viento had opposed using humans until the very end, there was a real chance he might simply kill Yuki. May acknowledged that it was a valid concern. Vento and Yuki stepped into a magic circle. When Yuki opened his eyes, he was shocked to realize they were still inside the dungeon. Viento explained that this was another facet of the Demon King's power. Each executive was granted a personal dungeon floor to use. Yuki was the first human ever to see an executive's floor. Viento told him to consider it an honor. Seeing the scale of the dungeon and the number of floors it possessed, Yuki realized just how much of a last resort resurrection truly was. He asked Vento whether his training would help him level up. Viento explained that for humans, leveling up meant eroding the magic of others, monsters, or entire dungeons, and assimilating it into themselves. In other words, adventurers damaged dungeons simply by fighting within them. They took the magic for themselves. Yuki had formed a contract with the Demon King. Although the executives had different vessels, they all shared the magic of Liber's dungeon. Because of that, conventional leveling was impossible. Yuki realized that this was another reason Liber had sent him to other dungeons despite the risks. He asked Viento how he planned to train him. Vento threw a sword at him. Yuki caught it instinctively and understood. He intended to arm him properly. Viento said there were countless things to teach him, starting with the fact that Yuki had no foundation whatsoever. He wanted Yuki to turn the techniques he learned into real strength because Yuki lacked power. He lacked knowledge, and he lacked talent. Yuki barely had time to process that before Viento attacked him. Vento told him that if he wanted to reclaim Elvina, he first had to build a foundation, strength, technique, knowledge, talent, everything. Vento moved so fast that Yuki doubted he could even keep up. Viento told him that if Yuki failed, then the fate of everything would have to be entrusted to someone else of that caliber. Yuki sensed killing intent, then realized it wasn't quite that. Viento clarified that he wouldn't make such a judgment lightly for the sake of the dungeon and Lord Liber. Yuki understood. Then to Viento, someone like him dying wouldn't matter. Viento gave him one condition: survive for 3 hours. To truly make a sword your own, nothing surpassed standing at the brink of death. Their blades collided. Yuki vowed to endure hell itself and bring her back to life. Yuki activated his demon eye of truth, revealing Vento's skill, Blood Petal Blade. Every single strike was lethal. The gap between them was so vast that Yuki couldn't even see a way out. If he couldn't block the attack, then he had no choice but to move somewhere he couldn't even see the danger coming from. Viento asked if that was really the only skill Yuki could use. Then he attacked again. The blade grazed Yuki's face, leaving a shallow cut. Vento continued his assault, but Yuki managed to evade every strike. Vento noticed it immediately and acknowledged that Yuki was at least capable of dodging. However, Yuki's movements were full of unnecessary motion. That was exactly why Viento pointed out. Yuki's counterattacks were being shut down so easily, Yuki was completely overwhelmed. Vento could tell that he couldn't even buy himself a moment to breathe. Worse still, his judgment was slow. If he only thought about his next move after being blocked, it was no different from asking to be killed. Viento leapt down with his blade and struck hard. Yuki barely managed to block in time, sparks exploding on impact as he realized just how dangerous the blow had been. Yuki tried to think of his next move. He swung his weapon and pressed the attack. Viento calmly blocked it, stopping the strike with minimal effort. He told Yuki that forcing an offense wouldn't change anything. Then Viento blasted him away with a single strike. Drops of blood splattered across the floor. Still, Yuki had managed to cut a small portion of Vento's hair tie. Viento noticed it. Yuki's movements had improved. Yuki said that he could see Vienna's movements, the way he swung his sword, and the most efficient way to block it. So it wasn't just about stats. With his eyes, Yuki could understand how a monster moved its body. Vienna was impressed that Yuki wasn't just staring blindly, but it still wasn't enough. To begin with, their physiques were different. Their sword skills were different. And above all, their experience was worlds apart. Yuki knew he was in a terrible situation. His arms and legs were battered. Danger markers filled his vision, and Viento still hadn't used any mana. This was nothing but pure swordsmanship. Yuki still hoped that he could catch up. Viento found it impressive that Yuki retained such an unyielding spirit after all that. He wondered whether it was simple recklessness or something more. So he decided to test it. He released an ominous power. Danger markers flooded Yuki's vision all at once. He couldn't see anything. If this continued, he would die. If he couldn't see through it, there was no future for him. Yuki decided that he no longer needed danger information. What he needed most was information about Viento's skill. He had to change his perspective. He was as good as dead anyway. He didn't want information that only helped him survive. Viento transformed blood into blades, unleashing repeated slashes toward his target. Yuki focused on that. Their attacks collided, releasing a violent surge of energy. The shockwave blasted rocks and debris in every direction. Viento was left speechless. A shallow cut had appeared on his cheek. He looked down at Yuki, who lay unconscious on the ground. By the end of the battle, Yuki's body was covered in slashes. Sometime later, Yuki jolted awake. Viento was waiting for him at the foot of the bed. He told Yuki to follow him at once. Yuki was slightly disoriented. He remembered taking Viento's skill during the fight. He asked what had happened to his wounds. Viento replied that Mei had healed them. Since Yuki hadn't died, it hadn't required much mana. Deep down, Viento hadn't expected Yuki to attempt stealing his technique at such a critical moment. That only made him more curious about what lay ahead for him. Regardless, his real training would now begin. First, they entered a room filled with monsters. Naturally, Yuki was startled. The number of enemies was high, but Vento believed he could handle it easily. Yuki unsheathed his sword. He was starting to get used to the idea of death. The next thing we knew was that Yuki was confused. He couldn't understand why he had been assigned to serve tea to monsters. On top of that, he was dressed in a butler's uniform. Vento explained that a top-tier swordsman allowed no wasted movement in their conduct. Posture, footwork, and even the smallest gestures had to be perfectly optimized. That was why Yuki had to learn to strip away everything unnecessary. A butler's work tolerated no lapses, no hesitation, not even the slightest tremor in the fingertips. One had to learn how to command the entire body. At the same time, one also had to learn how to properly use their eye. Skills evolved depending on how they were used. Monsters of various races had gathered for the tea party. Yuki had to read each of them precisely, understanding what they desired. Yuki began by watching and memorizing every single movement Viento made. He observed how Viento poured tea and carried out his duties. No matter what he did, Viento remained calm and elegant, even when carrying a stack of plates. When Yuki tried the same thing, his hands trembled. He even dropped a plate, shattering it on the floor. That was when he realized something important. Watching and learning wasn't enough. Actually, performing the actions with his own body was far more difficult. He couldn't believe how poorly he mimicked Viento. It was something he had never noticed during battle. That realization led him to understand that simple imitation wouldn't work. He needed to add his own interpretation. He began pondering how to truly command his entire body. The next day, he served an intimidating monster. The creature showed interest in Yuki because he was the human Vento often spoke with, which meant he must be strong. Yuki clarified that he was still in the process of becoming stronger. The monster volunteered to whip him into shape and struck him. Because Yuki was short on stamina, he activated his eye. Using it, he tracked Viento's movements and the monsters around him. He tested his timing, and a punch landed cleanly on the monster's jaw. On the fourth day, he served a lizard-like monster. Using his eye, he noticed that it was cold. He observed, predicted, and moved accordingly. He placed a blanket over the lizard-like monster. It immediately became fond of him. The monsters there were incredibly diverse, nothing like humans at all. Slowly, Yuki began to understand why Viento had chosen this kind of training. On the sixth day, his guest was a small, cute bat. It was hungry. Yuki served it confidently only to realize that it wanted his blood. The bat's skill was blood suck, allowing it to consume blood as a substitute for food. On the seventh day, Yuki demonstrated his tea-serving skills to Viento himself. He asked how he did. Viento deducted points for taste and language, but his conduct passed. For days now, Yuki had been doing nothing but fighting and attending tea parties, and somehow he had endured it all. At the very end, something finally clicked. But Viento corrected him. He said Yuki was only just reaching the final stage. That stage was a battle with him. Viento activated Blood Petal Blade. Yuki immediately unsheathed his sword. Viento was impressed. Yuki could now activate his eye instantaneously. He had once mimicked the skill unconsciously, but now imitation was no longer enough. If Yuki didn't make it his own, he would die. Yuki didn't need to be told that. Death was a natural outcome. He activated his eye and the description of Blood Petal Blade appeared. The skill transformed stored blood into blades, unleashing repeated slashes upon the target. Normal defense was impossible. It could only be neutralized by an attack of the same type. This time, Yuki could see it in far greater detail, and now he knew how to use his body as well. He activated the same skill, blood petal blade, and their swords clashed. But to his shock, Yuki's sword shattered. A slash opened across his abdomen and blood poured out. Viento was disappointed. He wondered if Yuki had fallen just one step short. Blood pooled on the floor. Yuki felt regret. He still hadn't saved Elvina. He warned Viento not to place limits on him. Otherwise, they were going to have a problem. He used the blood on the floor and activated his own version of blood petal blade. It transformed stored blood into countless fine blades, unleashing a storm of slashes. Normal defense was impossible. It could only be neutralized by an attack of the same type. Viento was stunned. Yuki had reinvented the skill. Yuki refused to give up after failing once. Instead, he chose to win through sheer volume, raining blood-forged swords down upon Viento. Then he struck with his blade. Viento blocked it. He was genuinely impressed. Yuki asked for his opinion. Viento replied that Yuki wouldn't be able to use that skill in rapid succession. Yuki staggered. He had reached his limit. Viento caught him before he fell. Neither of them noticed that Yuki's phone slipped from his pocket. As Viento supported him while walking, he told Yuki that he still had much more to teach him. A message arrived. Saki informed him that she had found the dungeon exploration request he had asked about. She was worried for him. Even as a joint mission, it was still a B-rank dungeon, and the boss inside was unknown. Yuki informed Lieber that he would be entering a B-rank dungeon. Lieber could tell that Yuki had already gained a considerable amount of power. Viento commented that even though Yuki's manners were still a little rough, his swordsmanship had become noticeably more refined. Lieber was curious whether an E-rank like Yuki could really enter a B-rank dungeon. Yuki clarified that he wasn't clearing it. He was going along as a research assistant, the same arrangement as when they first met him. That was when they realized he intended to clear the dungeon if the opportunity presented itself. They asked who he planned to contract with. They were all surprised by his choice. After that, Yuki headed to the Adventurers Guild. Saki greeted him cheerfully. Noticing the sword at his waist, she grew curious and asked whether he had recently learned how to use one. Yuki apologized for making such an unreasonable request this time. However, Saki didn't mind at all. She often received very specific requests like this. If anything, having someone she knew along made things easier for her. Suddenly, a man called out to Saki. He was accompanied by two others. They urged her to hurry up so they could head to the dungeon. When they noticed Yuki, they asked who he was. Yuki quietly asked Saki whether they were party members. She shook her head. She explained that they weren't collaborators she had invited. Instead, they were volunteers who had picked up the request from the guild. Their goal was simple: rank up efficiently by taking low-risk requests while tagging along with an S rank like her. Since Yuki was with Saki, they assumed he was a rank. When Saki told them he was E rank, one of them asked if that was a problem. The man laughed, finding it amusing that Yuki was ranked lower than them. He went on to say that an E rank would only be a burden, claiming they were doing Saki a favor. He told her to ditch that loser and take proper B rank members instead. Saki ignored him and mentioned that Yuki had cleared 2 dungeons alone. Yuki gave a vague reply, saying it was something like that. The men didn't believe it. An E-rank clearing dungeons solo was unheard of. Normally, adventurers ranked up through investigations or delivery requests. Unless someone was aiming for a rank or higher, dungeon clearing wasn't even attempted. The leader of the group grew irritated. His original plan was to manipulate Saki into clearing dungeons so he could ride her success straight to a rank. If someone had actually cleared dungeons alone, it would ruin his chances of standing out. He pressed the issue again, but Saki had had enough. She firmly stated that he was hired to assist with an investigation, not a clear. She then explained their current target. The dungeon was estimated to be B rank, known as the Cave of Cloistered Desire. Dungeon ranks were determined by the boss. Yuki asked how they could estimate the boss's threat level without seeing it. Saki explained that it was based on dungeon complexity. The stronger the boss, the larger and more intricate the first floor would be. Stronger bosses also meant more floors leading up to them. In short, the rank was determined by the size of the first floor and the number of floors. According to records, the dungeon was small in scale with narrow paths. With 22 floors, it was classified as B rank. However, no matter which room they searched, they couldn't find the boss. Eventually, the investigation request had been passed to Saki, though she admitted she wasn't particularly good at this type of work. Suddenly, a massive worm-like monster emerged. The blonde-haired man pointed it out to their leader. That obnoxious leader immediately shouted at them not to interfere. It was his prey. He cleaved the creature in half with his axe. Grabbing one half of the corpse, he boasted to Saki that he had taken it down flawlessly. Saki felt conflicted. Subduing monsters wasn't part of the investigation request. Yuki could tell that being an S rank came with its own difficulties. That same man, Gaido, turned to Yuki and mocked him, demanding that the E rank do something for once. As he kept yapping, the wall behind him suddenly collapsed. A massive rock-like monster emerged. It was a golem. Saki and Yuki moved at the same time. She activated Luminous Slash. Gito froze. He hadn't even seen her move. Saki told them that she didn't need combat support. She only wanted them to focus on investigating and staying alive. Then Yuki apologized. He carefully struck the golem, making sure not to get in her way. Saki asked if he had timed his attack with hers. Yuki replied that he had. It looked sturdy. She was stunned. Even if it was just once, the fact that he could keep up was impressive, especially considering he had only recently started learning the sword. Her face flushed slightly. It was far more than she had expected. Now she understood why the fight had been so smooth. She smiled brightly, thanked him for his help, and praised him for doing well. Since the golem had emerged directly from the wall, Yuki couldn't help thinking that dungeons truly made no sense. Saki told him to leave combat to her while they focused on investigating. Gito looked displeased. With things turning out this way, he became even more determined to find the boss room and make a contribution. But after 10 hours, they still hadn't found a single trace of it. The three men were exhausted. Saki searched around again, but there seemed to be nowhere left to go to reach the next floor. They had already checked for hidden branches. Yuki placed his hand against the wall, curious about what lay beyond it. Gaido scoffed at him, lecturing him about dungeon mechanics. A dungeon was an isolated magical dimension, he explained. It only looked like part of their world. Even if it resembled a cave, it wasn't one. Gaido suddenly lunged forward, driving his knee toward Yuki. Yuki stood frozen, barely reacting as the attack closed in. Gaido warned him that trying to dig through dungeon walls would only result in hitting a layer of mana and injuring himself. Yuki calmly replied that it didn't look that way to him. Gaido was confused. Using his special eye, Yuki revealed that the entire cave was made of the same material as the golems they had been fighting. Understanding dawned on Saki. She told everyone to step back and unleash Luminous Slash. A hole opened in the wall, and she ordered them inside. The moment they entered, they were greeted by a massive golem. The tension was palpable, especially for Gaido. Saki realized the truth. They weren't inside a dungeon. They were inside a golem that had been masquerading as one. Gaido asked what the point of that was. The answer was obvious: to fake its rank. Yuki asked whether this meant they had just reached the real first floor. The sheer scale of the space gave him a clue. It felt like stepping outdoors. Saki initially thought it was a rank. Then she corrected herself. It was on the verge of becoming shrank. They reviewed the intel first. Only then did they confirm the truth. This wasn't a B-rank dungeon, but an A-rank super large dungeon. The desert floor itself was made of golems, camouflaged as the dungeon. Yuki and Saki focused their attention on something in the distance. A floating castle. Gaido noticed that the massive golem beneath them had stopped moving. Saki explained that it had likely shut down to conserve mana after failing its objective. He didn't understand what she meant, so Saki elaborated. The dungeon had probably been designed to prevent an S-rank conquest, someone like her. That realization made her wary. Gaido was stunned. He had always believed monsters were nothing more than glorified animals. Saki corrected him. Dungeons weren't merely resource generators. Originally, they were front lines built to repel enemies that threatened human society. Yuki already knew this. He was aware that monsters possessed intelligence, strategy, and in some cases, even emotions. Saki treated the situation as a blessing in disguise. They had discovered it before it could fully evolve into an S-rank threat. She decided to strike before it went into hiding. With that, she declared, the investigation complete. The conquest would begin. She told the others to head back while they still could and report to the guild. Fortunately, since this was still the first floor, the gate was right there. But Yuki couldn't afford to leave. He said he wanted to stay. Saki looked at him and asked if he was sure. Seeing her calm expression, Yuki asked whether she truly wanted him to come along. She replied that she needed someone who could carry the boss's intel back if things went wrong. And among everyone present, he was the best choice. She grabbed him by the collar, looked straight into his eyes, and said that both of them were going home together. Yuki agreed. More than anything, he didn't want anyone else to die. With that, Saki lifted him princess style and took off. She activated Luminous Formula and dashed forward. In an instant, Gaido could no longer see them. Still, he refused to simply go home. A fragment of yellow crystal fell to the ground. As Saki sped toward the floating castle, they took the shortest route possible by breaking through the floors. The mana grew so dense that it felt like they had reached the dungeon's deepest layer. Suddenly, a voice echoed. It expressed surprise that humans had managed to reach this place on their own. A red crystallized figure flipped through the air, glowing brilliantly. Its sharp, gem-like body spun as it descended. They had met the dungeon boss, a jewel golem, Carrot. She aimed to become the most beautiful and effortless demon lord. Saki realized that Carrot had been secretly accumulating mana for that purpose. She confirmed her suspicion. Little by little, Carrot had been polishing her beauty. Without warning, Carrot activated Carrot Critical Cutter and targeted Yuki. At the same time, Yuki activated the Demon Eye of Truth. He dodged her rapid, continuous attacks. That alone impressed Carrot. Normally, the fight would have ended right there. Her movements were blindingly fast. A single hit would have been fatal, but compared to Viento, she felt almost motionless. Yuki wasn't afraid. He countered her attacks with his sword. Carrot mocked him, saying it was useless. Her body was far harder than the golems they had fought earlier. Yuki already knew that his goal wasn't to damage her. It was to create an opening. And in that moment, Saki unleashed Luminous Slash. Carrot recoiled in shock. They had scratched her. Saki acknowledged that Carrot was durable, but not unbreakable. She blasted her into the wall. Yuki couldn't help thinking how absurd Shrank skills truly were. Carrot complained that it hurt. Saki noticed something unsettling. The monster hadn't lost her composure. That meant there was more. She warned Yuki not to lower his guard. He nodded and asked what was coming next. Saki pressed the attack, chaining strikes together to wear Carrot down. Then Carrot spoke. She said she had seen it. Their weakness. She activated Carrot Creation. Colossal. An enormous amount of mana was consumed. Yet nothing seemed to happen. Suddenly, Saki's face turned pale. The golems outside where Gaido and the others were had regenerated. The path to the gate was sealed. Carrot informed them calmly that if they didn't save those men, they would die. Saki realized the truth. Carrot had gathered materials from the golems themselves. The situation had turned dire. If they wasted time defeating Carrot, the others would die. But she also couldn't afford to look away from the boss. Yuki told her to go. They couldn't leave Carrot unattended. So he said it plainly. He would defeat her. Saki entrusted everything to him. Before she dashed away, she smiled and told him that they would celebrate together when they returned. Carrot laughed. She found it amusing that someone who couldn't even scratch her was staying behind. To her, he was nothing more than a sacrificial pawn. But Yuki corrected her. This wasn't sacrifice. It was trust. Saki, Liber, even Viento, they believed in him. That belief was the reason he stood there now, and that was why he would answer it. Carrot stiffened when she felt his mana surge. She couldn't understand why a human possessed the power of a monster. Yuki declared that from this moment on, he would fight as a monster, to mare her. He warned her to prepare herself for a sword technique belonging to a monster far stronger than her. Carrot was genuinely shocked when Yuki's blade cut into her. He had completely seen through her skill. By reading her movements and power flow, he wasted nothing. Every motion was precise. She immediately switched techniques. Activating Carrot Cure Cut. She was confident with the shape that there was no way he could parry it. She would annihilate him. Yuki challenged her, daring to see if his sword could still reach her. He looked confident, but she sensed a gap and instantly used Slash. He used her own hardness against her. It completely caught her off guard. Yuki struck, crystals scattered from her body. She couldn't believe it. He had damaged her from the very start. Only now did she truly understand the strength of a monster tamer. The fact that he dared to damage her shell enraged her. There was no way she would forgive such an insignificant human. Yuki knew this wouldn't end there. She released more power, finally revealing her true skill. Her class curse activated Carrot skill change. She polished, compressed, decorated. Her body transformed into the hardest, sharpest, and most beautiful golem imaginable. The true power of a master dungeon. Humans were sealed inside crystals where she extracted mana. She planned to grind him down until he was nothing more than a grain of sand. He wouldn't even earn a place in her collection. Carrot's massive hammer-like arm slammed down toward Yuki. Her confidence grew. There was no way he could kill her now. Yuki mocked her obsession with making herself and her subordinates massive, calling it unoriginal. She replied coldly that gems are more valuable the larger they are. Yuki countered that skill was what truly mattered and how beautifully the gems were cut. He activated the blood petal blade. Carrot froze when she saw it. She couldn't understand how a human possessed a skill so similar to a monster's. He told her it was his own style. Swords bloomed around her, closing in from every direction. Her barrier shattered. The blades slashed relentlessly from all sides. Blood sprayed as her body was carved apart. Yuki finally relaxed. He had gambled on the move and it paid off. Blood dripped from his sword. He could feel its weight. With his back turned, Yuki didn't realize that Carrot was still conscious. She couldn't believe Dao saw her psychic sacrificed most of her body as disposable material. It was an absurdly powerful skill, but the cost was enormous. She launched a sneak attack, but Yuki deflected it instantly. He warned her again. He could see through her movements. Still, she noticed something important. He was nearing his limit. Once more, Yuki used the blood petal blade again in his own style. She was confused. Why do it again when his body could barely move? Yuki admitted it himself. He couldn't move anymore. So he summoned help. A small, adorable bat appeared. It smiled at him. Earlier, inside Liber's dungeon, they had already understood why Yuki chose that monster. His plan was simple. Use the blood he had stored. The bat skill was vampirism, allowing it to absorb blood and convert it into sustenance. It was a skill that required massive amounts of blood. If both attempts failed, Yuki would be in mortal danger. Yuki could only contract one monster. That meant the second strike had to land. The first attack used his own blood. Vento was deeply worried Yuki would be left on the brink of death. But that was exactly the point, using weakness to bait the enemy into lowering their guard. His plan was to exploit his own vulnerability to approach the strongest vampire. And that was when the cute little bat would do its job. Carrot finally realized this had been his goal from the very beginning. As the battle ended, Yuki introduced himself as Yuki, a monster tamer who fights using everything, enemies and allies alike. He sliced Karat cleanly in half. She called him a monster, her body shattered into countless gem fragments. Yuki calmly replied that he was human, a human who had formed a contract with the Demon King. Now that Yuki felt the dungeon's power, his eyes burned like they were on fire. He knew he had already pushed himself far enough. Our boy then started absorbing the mana of the whole dungeon towards his marking, and after a few more moments, he was on the verge of collapse. So he entrusted everything to Liber. Surprisingly, Saki arrived at that exact moment and caught him. She was stunned when she realized what had happened. Yuki had defeated Karat alone. He was too anemic to even stand, so she supported him as best she could. Meanwhile, the media had gathered in front of a man who was about to make an announcement. He spoke about the A-rank dungeon. Because of a special incident, the parties involved would be required to report directly and explain the situation. Reporters fired off photos nonstop. This was guaranteed front-page news. They called out the name of the person who had contributed the most in the dungeon. The fake dungeon alone was already massive news, but a successful conquest on top of that made even a hardened middle-aged official admire the adventurer responsible. Saki was called to the front. The crowd lit up the moment they saw her. As expected, of the white flash, people adored her. One reporter asked about the dangers of a dungeon collapse. Another reporter asked whether an intelligent monster had appeared. She told them to quiet down before calmly explaining the outline of the conquest. Deep down, she felt it was a huge hassle, but Yuki had pushed the task onto her. The moment Yuki received the document outlining the report, he handed everything to her and disappeared. She suggested he stay until his treatment was finished, but he was already gone. It made her wonder what kind of business could possibly be that important. Meanwhile, Yuki rushed straight to Liber's dungeon, and the moment he arrived, he asked how the resurrection was going. Mei was unleashing a terrifying surge of power as she answered that she was just finishing the final stage. Viento immediately told Yuki to stop watching. The mana alone could burn his eyes. Yuki could tell. Just standing there, he felt an overwhelming pressure bearing down on him. Mei called Elvina over and told her that break time was officially over. She warned her that staying in the netherworld forever was something she would never forgive. As she activated the approval of the afterlife, the chains of mana surrounding them began to move. After that, Elvina opened her eyes. Yuki finally relaxed when he saw her standing. She asked why he looked so relieved, and then she realized she must have died. Yuki told her the truth. She had come back to life. She already knew it was because of the head maid's resurrection, but she had believed her death was meaningless. So the result surprised her. Yuki let out a deep sigh and said how glad he was that she was still so energetic. Since he had just said that to a zombie, she asked if that was supposed to be an undead joke. He immediately yelled that it wasn't. Viento cut into their banter and told them to get back to work at once. He ordered them to change clothes. Yuki sighed and asked if the job involved being a butler again. Elvina tilted her head and asked if he had ever worked as one. He denied it instantly. That was when May brought them their outfits.